How's it going, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the James Loud Podcast. Today, my guest is Lance, and he works with Terplock now, but we've known each other for a long time. How you doing, Lance?
I'm doing really good, man. Stoked to finally be up here.
Dude, it's great having you on. I guess let's start off talking about Spain in 2019. The best interview I've ever done that never aired.
I know, that was frustrating. We still need to hit up Peter for that. Yeah, that was... I'd known about you, both of us, being from the Bay Area and background and kind of similar backgrounds. I saved up for college thanks to flower, thanks to this plant. And so I've been following you for a while. So when Peter's like, hey, you got to interview James, I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm all about it.
Nice.
And it was cool. It was nice because you're like right across from where we were set up with the company I was at the time. And
totally.
Dude, you're doing your thing. And it was nice to see a domestic genetics company in Spain. Because we don't have to go too far now because you know all about this, but there's two epicenters as far as I'm concerned with genetics, and Spain's one and California is the other. Yeah. And so you're there, and a lot of people don't know, if you're not familiar with Cannabis, started out as a protestable like most international, but I just did an audit of the show last year. 21% of the exhibitors are genetics. So people don't realize that. And you notice it when you're walking through it, because we've done several of them over the years. But then when you put that in perspective, it's like 1 out of 5 booths are genetics.
And about 5 different companies make the seeds for all of them.
See, and exactly true as well. And some of them come up and some people know that and some people don't. But again, to see that American representation, there's a few other companies, but you're on an awesome trajectory. And I think the thing that I've always been a fan about as far as what you do is the genetics that you're into. Because I'm into the generational stuff. Like I'm talking about more of the Landrace, Acapulco Gold and Swahili and Durban Poison and just all these genetics that really were at the core, back in the day.
So that interview, I had taken a microdose of what I thought was a microdose of mushrooms. Oh, no. And then the funny part of the story is that I was high on mushrooms. I actually was talking to Mario and to Jai. They were arguing, actually.
No way.
And so I was like, I got to get out of here. And then next thing you know, you're grabbing my arm and you're like, we need to do this interview. And I'm like, fuck, dude. Okay, let's try it.
I didn't notice.
And you ended up giving me a hug afterwards. And I was like, I think it's the best interview I've ever done. And you're like, I think it was a really good interview.
Yeah.
And then I went away and you came back maybe an hour later and you're like, dude, we didn't have the sound. Dude, the sound on the microphone. We have the sound from the camcorder, but that was it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's frustrating that the guy who was on site there that Peter hired, which he obviously did not hire again. But it was tough. Yeah. Cause we lost quite a bit on that. And there were some of the best interviews to your point. Like it was so natural, and both of us, not to speak for you, but I feel like we're both very approachable and personable, and we're about good vibes and we're about community. And you don't have to be from NorCal to have this mentality, but there's enough of us that do. So when you get a few of us together, it just flows. It's not scripted.
Right. And sometimes talking about deviating from talking about genetics and talking about the passion for the sacred plant and why we're all doing this. I think that's important. And, sometimes that gets overlooked a little bit. And, I just went to 3 days of Dead and Company, and I think we're here in part to the Grateful Dead and their influence on the cannabis industry. Brands like Anchor Steam that we just found out, Anchor Steam is now closing doors after 130 years or something like that.
It's insane.
And Fred Maytag, he's a big contributor to the reason cannabis is legal, in my opinion.
No, true. So, and we talked about that a little bit before this. Yeah. Like I was telling you, when people ask me, and I love doing these interviews during 420 because people feel like there's still a mystique and they don't quite know the story. And I'm like, no, the story is very factual. Like if you're, so I'm from Marin County, San Anselmo, which is right next to San Rafael, and in the Waldos, like we were discussing, who went to school at San Rafael High and I was over Sir Francis Drake, but they're a little bit older than us. I'm friends with one of their daughters, but they were class of 71. But it's like, no, we know this history. We know they're looking for the lost crop out at the beach. And we know that all of a sudden they started, one of the guys started touring as a roadie with the Dead, and that kind of took 420 to that national level. And I mean, it's just, there is a history. And the one thing I like that nobody argues is like, this really is the epicenter for the culture and craft. Yeah. While the country is falling behind on legalization, and I contribute that to extreme capitalism, you have over 36 countries that have legalized already around the world, but no one can argue. Like, and this, you travel too, man. I was in Thailand in January, and people were like, you're from NorCal, man, Humboldt flower. Australia, they know Humboldt. South America, they know Humboldt. You know, some know the Triangle. A few know Mendocino. Nobody knows Trinity County. That's a funny thing. When I'm so like, weird, do you know the Emerald Triangle? It's actually 3 counties. And they're like, really? And I'm like, can you name it? You always love quizzing people. Yeah. But there's a lot of history and there's a lot of influence, you know, post Summer Love, post Hippie Hill. And it carried through from that 60s, 70s, and still today with what guys like you were doing, you know?
Yeah.
So
when did you start smoking? Late 80s, early 90s?
I started, oh my gosh, man. That was a good, it was either 89 or 90. Yeah. I was a young teen. I had older siblings. So pros and cons to that. You know, I started partying a little bit younger. And like we've talked about, like I said, you know, mine back in the day, it was tough because we got some good stuff off the hill. But as kids, it was like either you got stuff from south of the border, the brickweed, you know, Mexi Tire, whatever it was. Or at the time for me, the coveted was Northern Lights because that was really hot back then. You know, I mean, you would come across a little Swahili or maybe someone had some Durban or something. But that was my early experience was either you're going to be totally blasted or you can consume it all day, you know?
Yeah. And we had a lot of times it was green bud. You were buying green bud. We bought green bud and it could have been any name, you know, not really knowing what it was. There was green and brown.
Yeah, that was it. It was green and brown. And then there's Snap, Crackle, Pop, right? Like I remember, and I'm not saying, man, the kids these days don't know we went up the hill, you know, 2 miles in snow both ways to school. I'm not trying to be like a fallen old head, but dude, we were picking out sticks and stems and seeds. And, you know, of course we tried to grow those seeds. I'm sure you did just like I did. And
totally. And there's good stuff in there.
Yeah.
I wish I would had more stuff saved.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I think especially, you know, some of the Mexican stuff that we were getting, I mean, there's a lot of good genetics in there.
There is.
It wasn't grown necessarily the best. It wasn't cured or dried properly. And it would get you really high, but a lot of times you get a headache from smoking it.
Yeah, you would.
You know, like a strong, debilitating headache, you know, tight behind the eyes, not like headband, but like tight, like in pain.
And something else. It was, it was different times. And, you know, I remember slinging and it's something, it's interesting, man, because I think we talked about it before, man. You know, I came out of the proverbial green closet in the teens, you know, because while flower was a big part of my life growing up and growing here, I mean, I remember going down and boarding in Half Moon Bay. My buddy's uncle grew in Scotts Valley and we'd swing by there on the way to Capitola for Pizza My Heart, right? For lunch. Nice. It's like these memories of hanging out with these old heads that they were growing some fantastic stuff. And the bud wasn't highly manicured. It sure as hell wasn't indoor. It was either hoop or outdoor in their garden, buried between, you know, crops. And it's nostalgic, but it definitely has changed, but it was a different time. And your point, sometimes it was green or it was brown. It was good. It was great.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, we used to drive down for eighths of weed into Santa Cruz, and it was called the strawberry, but it was skunk. It was a skunk bud, but it was the reason it was called strawberry was because it was strawberry sized nuggets. Had nothing to do with the flavor. It was skunk weed. It was the skunk weed. It was like, you know, what I would, you know, people say roadkill skunk, whatever, but this stuff was strong skunk, not cat piss that had the ammonia. It was just straight skunk. And it tasted skunk down to the roach, and one little bud of it would just smell everything up, which you don't really see stuff like that anymore.
You don't, man. It's interesting what some of the guys are smoking up on the hill. Like I go up there and you know, it was a little more popular a few years back, but Forbidden Fruit's a good example of that, you know? So we talk about the stuff, and I was telling it was so, I really felt my age, but in a good way. So you were at the Deadhead over the weekend. I was at Northern Nights Music Festival, which is heavy music. Yeah, they had, you know, some great bands and some great DJs, but the undertone is health and wellness and culture and craft. It takes place on the border of Humboldt and Mendocino County, like you're in the heart of Emerald Triangle.
Right.
And I'm sitting kind of preaching to these kids and telling them some of the stories. And I'm like, you know, there was a reason why genetics morphed and changed over the years, especially in the 80s with the war on drugs, because the guys that were growing up on the hill, they needed to be mindful of the smell and the way that they were able to grow, now under hoop, now under cover. And so you're right.
Even the indoor guys, though, because there was no filtration like we have now. You know?
Not at all.
Even in the 90s, we did have filtration, but it didn't always work effectively.
And not today. I mean, and we won't call it names of specific brands, but there's a few companies that are killing it with that filtration. Yeah. And you wouldn't be any the wiser for what's being produced. But one cultivar going back to is Forbidden Fruit, and that stuff. So I was explaining to him, and it's interesting. I love quizzing people because I'm a facts guy, but I love sharing and educating. So I'm like, do you know what the median THC is of legal flower across this country? You know, and I asked these 5 guys, and they're all part of the production team. So it's kind of cool. So they've been around it and stuff. And one's like, 25%, 21, 23%, 40%, 15%. I'm like, well, the median THC level is 21%. Not that everything revolves around THC. I said, so take forbidden fruit. What do you think the median THC is? And they're like, go through a whole process. I'm like, it's about 15, 16%.
Yeah.
But the terpene percentage, we're talking 5%, 6 when the median's like 1%. So I started explaining to them, if cannabinoids are the engine, the terpenes are the steering wheel. So everyone's putting an emphasis on THC, but be mindful of those smells and those flavors, because that's what the real experiential is with the flower.
Right.
And they were just like mind blown. I started talking about all the different terpenes. They're like, and there was an old head there. I mean, like this guy was named Fred. He's been doing AV for all kinds of shows and huge Dead fan and stuff. And he's like, I don't even understand what you're saying. He's like, lemon and what? Merce and what? Like I'm like, dude, you need to learn your terp profile, man. You'll have that much better of an experience.
For sure.
But it's a whole evolution compared to what we grew up with what's accessible now, both by product and education.
Right.
So it's fun, man. I'm loving it.
Yeah. It's a different world now.
It is.
And a lot of the stuff is hype driven.
Yeah.
And that's okay too. You know, I mean, so you get a little bit of everything, but at the end of the day, quality is quality, and it's hard to argue quality. Now, quality is subjective to a degree. Flavor is subjective, but I feel like 100%. Quality, it's like if the roach tastes good when you fire it back up, you got some good stuff on your hands.
If it was just burnt and it's sad and you want to just keep it out, then that's a whole other story. And I agree. And you're spot on with the hype. Like, I don't mean to knock it, but I call them trendy triangle strains. And we went down this road of all these candies and desserts and everything. And there were some great genetics that kind of got overlooked. Like, I feel like GMO didn't get enough time in the light, because so many people are wrapped up in wedding cake, then ice cream cake, then gelato, 41, and now RS. Is this, the rainbow.
That was with different groups too, because I feel like GMO really with my friends, with Marlon, that, my good friend Marlon Asher, like he loved GMO. But yeah, I guess to a degree, I understand what you're saying. Same thing with Sunset Sherbert. I feel like that was another one that really didn't peak like it should have. Yep. It didn't get as much credit as it should have.
Yeah. And then you compare it to Skittles and Runts, and you're like, is almost or GG, which they're not bad.
Yeah.
But to your point, it gets hyped up and it gets into this social media bubble, and people are going after it for the wrong reasons. But I think that's also the experience, again, talking on the legal market, when people walk in and they're asking, I call it PC, cannabis consultants, but bud tenders.
Sure.
Hey, what should we smoke? And they're telling them what the loudest thing is to smoke, or what the most popular thing is to smoke. And they're not saying, hey, are you trying to get help with sleep, or do you have a knee injury, or
how high do you want to get?
How high do you want to get? Like you were talking about earlier, man, you're spot on. Like there's, when you're smoking something like Skittles, which I'm a huge fan of as well, it's just this nice, cool cruise, right? Yeah. It's not like out of your head. But then you throw in something like green crack, and someone isn't expecting that. They're like, what did you give me, man? They're getting on a whole other level.
Well, and green crack is one of those ones that your body will adapt to it really quickly.
Yeah.
But if you haven't been smoking it, it gets you super high and it peaks really quickly, and then it drops down actually too. Yeah. But man, it'll get you to the point where you need to sit down.
Yeah. So exactly true. And just take it all in. And and everybody's body is different too. I was telling that same group of kids, I was like, my friend came across, it was a GDP, which I love the old true Purple Urkel and Granddaddy, right? And so is a GDP crossed with Harlequin. And I explained the two different genetics and lineages of those both. And I said, it was one of those cultivars where I smoked it and I had to lay down and listen to Jimi Hendrix. Like that was just, that was the vibe. And it was like this, every once in a while you get into that perfect balance of heady and body,
right?
And it was that perfect heady body for me. And I tell people, if you find that perfect strain, stick with it. Like that's what your body wants, Yeah.
And it may not be the perfect strain forever, because it's all, it's one of those things that weed it should be consumed fresh. Yeah. And each batch is slightly different. You're not getting the same expression every time, especially grown, boutique flower.
Yeah.
And then even the commercial stuff, it's like, there's so many variables. If you think a plant flowers for roughly 70 days, there's a lot that can happen in those 70 days, even in an indoor environment, to where it can be slightly different.
Yeah. And I'm at the mercy of, I'm an outdoor, and it's nothing. I have a level of respect for dep and indoor, but I'm a traditional outdoor full term. And a good example of that, to your point, I was given some first round genetics from a guy out of Santa Cruz, thanks to Peter. He's like, hey, will you test run these? And I'm like, I kind of stick to Landrace. And he's like, well, it's a good cross. And it's Zihuataneo with Thai. and I didn't know how I was going to express, and I didn't know what to feed it. I didn't have any idea. But to your point, we got hit with a heat wave in SoCal, which a lot of people, oh, you're so lucky, Lance. You get to do, you've got the perfect climate. Like, not exactly when you're hitting triple digits and you're hotter than Vegas in September, like we got hit last
year. Yeah, I mean, there's been some rough summers. Yeah. I mean, the year before that, I went to 120 in Fallbrook when I was down there.
Yeah. And you're
my friends were working. So.
Yeah. And what came out of that versus if I were to rerun that now this season with El Nino, like you said, it's two different, the expression, because people put, and again, the genotype is a huge factor, but pheno, there's these different elements on how you experience these inputs that come into that, right?
Well, and outdoor is like making wine in the sense that we talk terroir, and then we talk about climate and weather and all these things that contribute to the final product.
Exactly.
Beyond drying and curing, there's so much that goes on with outdoor that it's different every year. And so you're going to have good vintages, you're going to have bad vintages, you're going to have a lot of stuff in between. And even growing the same exact genetics, you're going to get stuff all over the place every year, no matter what.
True. Yeah, it's very true. And you see it in your bed. Like I have a friend, Greg, he's down in Santa Cruz, and kind of wild, something I wouldn't think in that climate, but he went with a Kugel grow format. So he's like, I took these logs, let them soak all through winter, and now I'm growing these lines. And he's like, he got these gens, he got these pucks that he is running. And he said one of them, he's going to fully bomb because is so odd the way it expresses. Cause that thing's like, I don't know, 4.5 foot now, where its siblings are like 3 foot at best. And it's in the same bed and it's in the same grow format. And he's used, so the same media, the same environment. So to your point, the variants are great. And it's especially outdoor. And I'm a little jealous of I call it God growing. I'm dependent on Mother Nature, but the God growing indoor where you can control the environment. And I'm not saying it's easy, but you see that uniformity,
Well, and it's repeatable.
Yeah.
It's very repeatable.
Which you need from a medicine standpoint, which I'm not an activist. I'm a medical advocate first. So I fully respect that again, because if you have grand mal seizures, cerebral palsy, like if you find something that works and then someone goes, oh yeah, no, this is GG4. And no, it's not GG. It's maybe the genetics, but it's from a completely different grower growing a completely different way. To your point, growing's half the battle. You cure it, how you dry it. And I don't know if you're into it, but I age my bud. So I actually do 2, and then 2 months of aging, which I learned from the Italians. But how you handle it, like that really factors into the end product. And for a medical patient, that matters.
Totally. So I'm really big into aging, not because I want to age it, but because the quantities, it's like I want to, some stuff I want to save, but for the most part, I want to smoke the best stuff I have right at that moment. Yeah. But, leading into TerpLoc, it's kind of a game changer because I'm a mason jar guy. I was always, I used mason jars forever. Yep. And I was very skeptical of the TerpLoc. I mentioned on my podcast, which will be 2 podcasts ago, TerpLoc, and I think a couple other ones. But I did side-by-side testing, and if you keep it at the same temperature, the TerpLoc has more terps, and as you go longer, the longer you go, the more terps are in the TerpLoc bag.
Yeah.
So
it's pretty cool technology. I'm with you. So I was, again, I was taught, grew up with hippies. So I was taught the old way, and some might consider them wives' tales, but there was not factual information around this because this plant was suppressed for a century, is weaponized. So we knew what we knew, and that's what always worked. And when, again, the old guys taught you, hey, this is how I've done it, and you smoke it and it's fire, or at least fired us at that time, you're like, okay, it is what it is. But I was the same way. I ran mason jars and kept them sterile, did all the right process. I was a little uncertain about the TerpLoc technology because I thought all bags were created equal. Like we grew up with, Ziploc bags or whatever, baggies. Right. When I was slinging, I was selling in baggies, but that was based out in a set or film canisters. I don't know if you remember, we used to do the little stash cans, but I was kind of a little skeptical on it. And then once they explained the technology, because I'm one of the, and you've probably figured this out with me. Being that I'm community first, like I have to believe in the brand and the product that I'm representing. And I have to make sure that the culture and the core values of that company are represented as well. And I've made a few missteps in my career here, with companies that were maybe not necessarily in it for the same reasons as me, but I also got to a place in my career where I'm like, I'm in a good spot to where I can be a little more decisive and I can choose if this is a good match or not. So with these guys, I did a side-by-side test too before I came to join them. I took one crop and I split it and I did jars on one. I did TerpLoc on the other and did what they said. Hey, go through your traditional dry wear, 60-60-14, trim as you trim, and then put some in here, put some in the jar. I was floored because never had I not touched. As much as we hate it, like you have to babysit your buds when you're curing.
Yeah. And
typically.
Technically you guys say you don't even need to burp it.
Yeah.
I realize that you guys say you don't need to burp it, but I tend to want to look at my bud all the time. So I end up burping it without even thinking that I'm burping it,
And you are? So yeah, getting into technology to explain on that why you don't, because the polymers that we use. So again, and this isn't a throwaway bags. This is
you can reuse them. Yeah, for sure.
Time and time again, people are like, and again, you deal with some people on the hill. They're like, well, I like mason jars. I like glass because it's better for the environment. I'm like, okay, first off, the carbon footprint for producing glass in that tin top is exponentially higher than this.
Right.
But the carbon footprint for recycling that material is exponentially higher than this because it's recyclable as well. And then think about the logistics. Like you said, even if it's a craft grower, it's pulling down 500 pounds. You're putting that in jars and you're shipping it all the way to San Diego or LA. How much weight is that compared to the bags?
Totally.
So I've been on podcasts where this guy busts out a Yeti and he's got all this, and you hear it coming, you hear the rattling, right? And he pulls up and he's got the jars and it's also, and I'm like, here's what I grew last season. I keep it in a turkey bag tin. I am old school that way. And it's bags, I'm holding it with one hand and I'm like, it's all here. But the technology is cool because what it does is, this plant's pretty radical in itself, right? So we know that plants, when they're living, take in the carbon dioxide, put out the oxygen. Well, when they're dying, they do the opposite. So they release that oxygen to try to regenerate. So this actually pushes out the oxygen, keeps that CO2 in that environment because oxygen oxidizes, right? So it keeps it down to a few percent. So it still allows the maturing of the buds. But on top of that, the fact that you've got antimicrobial, anti-static, and UV protectant. Mm-hmm. And even our clear bags for guys like you, because same thing. Yeah. I start off with clear. We have what we call our glassless. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of making fun, it looks like a mason jar, but it's a bag.
Right.
But then you can see your buds, but you don't disrupt that environment. But it's cool that you figured out a secret, man. So we did a test with a lab, third-party lab, independent. We had to give them the flour and we had to give them the material to test. So we gave them the jars and we gave them the bags down in Lompoc in Santa Barbara County. And it was a long-term test, 3-month test. And they found that while you get to where you want to with cure in 2 weeks, the optimal percentage for both cannabinoids and terpenes is at 2 months in our bags. So if you can keep it in longer, it's not a detriment to the end product for you to do so. Yeah. And what happens after 2 months, because that's what friends have been asking me, it just levels off. It's not going to peak further than that, but it's going to sustain.
And if you keep it the right temperature, I mean, you're looking 6 months and it's still a good product.
Yeah.
The one thing is it's a bag, so you have to be aware of putting it in a bag and getting it smashed.
Yep.
Those are the things. Like I love carrying around a tote with a bunch of different flavors or whatever, and a backpack. Yeah. And if you're going to do that, you need to put them in jars or something like that to work. Because that's the only thing is you can get it smashed a little bit.
Yeah. We do it like Squints down in SoCal. He uses trays.
Yeah.
So he'll put in, again, that's a guy, totally respect his craft, being a full indoor guy. And his stuff, especially his Wendy, is super loud. I mean, that's one where I got in a regular bag and, bring it back home and my whole house smelled like a skunk came through. So I'm like, okay, I got to put this in another bag. But he puts them in the little trays, which does help with that. So that's one factor. But to getting into, man, this is, I got to share this and I got to tell the story behind this. I've only told a few people. Nice. So as far as segues. So I have to share, and you remember the phone call. So I was over at Ed Rosenthal's and we were on our way up to Hall of Flowers. And I stopped by with a few buddies, and you're as good a buddies too with Ed and Jane.
Oh yeah,
they're just lovely. They're just
good people,
couple, right? Really good people. And so we brought some flour, we consumed that, and then Ed brings out a baggie, and I mean literally, I'm like, Ed, you're giving me flashbacks of high school, man. Like, what do you do with that bag? And where did you get it? And he's like, oh, James gave me this stuff. And I open it up, and like, oh my gosh, like I knew you were a genetics guy, but from a growing standpoint, I didn't know you grew that well. Like really, I was like, my God, this stuff is fire. And then my second response was like, what is it doing in a regular bag? So that's when I called you and I'm like, dude, smoking your stuff right now. Ed gave it to me, but he gave it to me in a freaking sandwich bag. And I'm like, we got to come up with something. So I know it's the first time of you seeing it.
This is really awesome.
But that's exactly what we came up with.
It definitely embodies everything that we're doing. It has that 70s vibe.
And I love your 70s vibe because that was a big time for the community, for the industry. So
totally.
Definitely want to play on it. So yeah, we came together with the collab bags. Do with them as you will. But
awesome.
That's the one thing I wanted to come out of it. If I ever go back to Ed's and he has your flour, I didn't want, I didn't want to get it in a sandwich bag, you know?
Totally. Yeah. It's funny how much like polyethylene bags, sandwich bags, it's just, they kill the terps.
They do.
And people don't understand. They have a lot of, they have them sitting around. And the thing is like, man, unless they're in the freezer in those bags, you're killing terps. You're losing terps every day they go in those bags.
You are. So, you are, man. It's a hydrocarbon. People, and not to get geeky, but that's exactly it, man. Terpenes, and they're volatile hydrocarbons, and you get them even 70 degrees and higher, and they start dissipating. That's why people are like, God, this smells good. People keep opening the bag, and it's like you're losing a little bit of that love, and you can't get it back. That's the problem. Is it's genie in a bottle scenario, right? Once you let it out, it's not like I can put all that goodness back in. So being able to contain it and maintain it is a huge factor. And even a study, a guy who's doing large scale pre-rolls up here, he had an R&D team that's doing a study. They found that there's up to a 50% terp loss post grind, and they're grinding hundreds of pounds a shift. And they're, oh my God, how much quality are we losing? What can we do to try to retain as much as we can post grind, but through the pre-roll process?
What they're talking about grinding is probably putting it in a blender.
Yes.
To be honest, I feel like a lot of guys that do pre-rolls, they blend it. And so like the pre-rolls, we've been working on a pre-roll to launch in Metric in California for a while. And if we do it, we're going to do it right. It's going to be hand ground. Everything's, and milled. We're going to use a, flour mill.
That's what I was going to say. You nailed it.
Yeah. But then the thing is with the joints, you want to consume them fresh. Yeah. They're not something you want to sit on a shelf for 2 months. You don't even really want to sit on a shelf for a month. If you could get a pre-roll should be rolled and smoked relatively quickly. I think that cold storage will help these things. Same thing, doing cold storage with these bags. It probably last a year.
And you absolutely can.
And still maintain really high quality.
Exactly true. We have fresh frozen bags for guys that are, on the concentrate side, but exactly your point, you can chill them, you can freeze them. I agree with you 100%. And you pointed out something a lot of people are not really aware of or cognizant of. We talk about grinding, but there's a difference between grinding and milling, and you nailed it. So grinding is you're pulverizing that material. Mm-hmm. And what you're doing is, you're ripping apart the biomass, but the most delicate part of this plant is on the outside, not the inside. So that's why I explain to people who are kind of the layman to the industry, can't you just handle it this way? Can't you just process? Isn't it the same as mushrooms or tomatoes or any? It's like, no, because all those things, the goodness is on the inside. And a lot of them have a protective layer. Yeah. Pineapples, oranges, every citrus fruit has this protective layer, but a lot of your gourds and, a lot of your other vegetables have protective layers, because I'm a gardener across the board. I've got citrus, I've got, all kinds of veggies, and I've got my flour. And so I explained to them, that's the difference, is it's all on the outside. Right. And then I explained to them, like, have you ever seen a hop? And they're like, yeah, I've seen a hop. I'm like, hop's the only cousin to cannabis. But something happened in the evolution of this plant centuries ago to where it expressed itself internally and externally. A hop, all the goodness is protected inside. Right. But with the cannabis plant, with the profile, everything's outside. So we can't handle it the same way we do others. So to your point, grinding, you're ripping the trichomes off that biomass. You're really,
especially
like
blending.
You said, pulverizing it. You're just
blending
it
is it's the worst.
Yeah, and it's so inconsistent. People think you're homogenizing it, but you're not. You're getting an inconsistency because you're getting clumps of those terps and of those oils and those flavonoids.
When you're turning it into a powder.
Yeah.
So it's
so milling it. You nailed it. Mill it and just have it work with itself in order to break it down to a better material. So, to do a plug, but the flour mill. That's why
flour mill is great. Yeah, flour mill is great. I mean, I use my old school grinder still too, but it's delicate.
Yeah.
But, so
we grew up like you remember the Mendo mulcher, the Santa Cruz shredder.
Dude, the Sweet Leaf was the first one, and I got one of the first 10 prototypes. And so Sweet Leaf is like close to my heart as well.
I've got,
but I love the flour mill. I met the guys from Flour Mill a while back, and they hooked me up with some flour mills. Good stuff.
He's on a mission too. He's just like you, that's the owner of a business that believes in his product, but he also cares about the community and he cares about the plant, and he's out there and you run it. I just saw him at Hall of Flowers. Like, you see him on the circuit, you see him working the shows and representing, and it's about being a part of the community, which is a bigger thing. And again, and
he believes in his product, and he should. His product's a good product.
Yeah, he definitely should. He should.
Yeah.
And I believe in it because I did it at scale back when I was working for
flour mills.
The packaging's on point. Being a marketing guy, I love
the packaging is great. I like the fact that you can go with different size grinds. So if you want a coarse grind, you can go coarse. If you want a fine grind, you can kind of go fine.
And people don't understand that. Like if you roll up, like I'm again old school, so I'm like more of the fine. But if you do like still snapping and ripping bongs, like you go for the coarse.
Yeah.
But people don't understand, like even that, and you mentioned kind of sommelier and wine.
But even joints, like so the bigger the joint, the more coarse you want to go.
That's
because
true.
you want the air to be able to travel.
Yeah.
You know, if it's too tight, you're not going to, too tight and the grind is too fine, you're not going to be able to get a good hit.
Very true.
And so you want to go coarse so you get all those air pockets in there so it travels down, that smoke travels down.
Yeah.
So, I smoked a 24-gram joint over the weekend with my producer of the show.
So you were at a Deadhead show.
Yeah. Dead and Company was pretty intense. It was pretty amazing. It was the final 3 tour dates in San Francisco.
And for it to be here, like again, for people who don't understand, like this is ground zero.
Oh yeah,
for that group and for that movement.
Oh, the whole band, everything around the band started here.
Yeah,
the music started here. Jerry's house was here. They grew up. Pretty much everybody grew up here.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's definitely some history. It's when I hit you up and was asking you if you were coming up on the hill, and you're like, no, and I'm like, got it. And then I ran into a few other people, same thing, that they're like, yeah, my buddy's going to come up and he's in San Francisco for the show. And it's legend, especially again, when you recognize how much of an influence it had on the community and the culture, so definitely makes sense.
And like the only requirement to being a Deadhead is that you have good taste in music. So, it's like you can be an asshole, you can be a good person, whatever, as long as you have good taste in music,
It's usually good vibes though, not to stereotype.
It is good vibes.
Yeah.
One of the ladies that was in our little group, because we were 20 feet back from the stage, maybe less, maybe like 15 feet back from the stage, which was amazing. But one of the ladies pointed out that the problems are caused by the people with alcohol. And if you look around, the ones with the beer cans in their hand are the ones that are pushing and shoving. It's not the ones on, psychedelics or the ones smoking weed. It's usually the ones with the alcohol. And there's definitely truth to that. I feel like alcohol kind of numbs you, and other things kind of, heighten your senses. And you really, for those kind of shows, you want to be hypersensitive. So they provide this hypersensitive experience for you if you're hypersensitive. So
that's where
it's an amazing experience.
I say the same thing. And that's where, again, why we get along so well. Because I tell people, and I kind of just put it as a summary. So I quit drinking back in 2019. And I was never really a big drinker. Again, I like the plant because of the holistic attributes to it. And being a cancer survivor too, I think about, okay, I need to put good things in my body because I never want to come out of remission.
Right.
But I just got bored of it. And it is interesting because to your point, I was like, man, alcohol makes me forget. Whereas you're like cannabis, not only helps me remember, but helps me discover. And that's again, this against the stereotype, when I call out, because I can be a little bit a touch of activist when I do give my opinion on the overall stereotype and stigmas and tabooisms associated with the plant. And I don't just blame Anslinger back in the 30s or Nixon in the 70s or Daryl Gates and Nancy Reagan with the DARE program in our era in the 80s.
Sure.
But I also blame Hollywood. I'm like, okay, so they've got characters like Spicoli and guys trying to go find White Castle and all this bullshit. It's like, that's not, maybe a little bit of short term because I'm so enthralled in the moment. But when I educate people and help them understand, it reclocks your brain so that everything from an experiential everything, music, food, sex, it doesn't matter. Everything is enhanced because it puts more of an enunciation on that experiential. But alcohol numbs you.
Totally. Well, and then there's guys like Sanjay Gupta who kind of brought it to the light on 60 Minutes years ago that made my parents aware of the benefits of cannabis and THC and CBD and all these things. And then we have Elon Musk, who he smokes on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he's the wealthiest person, in the world.
Yeah, and Sanjay, that's a good one, man, because he was going against the grain with us, and then he corrected himself. And it takes a big person to say I'm wrong or I misunderstood.
Right, but the big thing is how can you argue with a parent that wants to help their kid get better, their kid's sick, and it's like how are we to say that they're wrong?
Correct.
And that's my biggest argument. It's like, if it makes you better and you're not hurting anybody, how can you say that's wrong?
Yeah. That's what really, I don't talk about too much, but when I segue, because again, while it was such an influence when I was younger, I did go down the mainstream career path. But when I got pulled back in a good way in Denver, when it legalized, moved out there in 2014 and, eventually became GM of the cannabis, But the thing, I got to this pivotal point because I kind of pulled a Jerry Maguire because that company is owned by a hedge fund. And again, the beliefs weren't aligned, right? The culture and core values weren't aligned with me. Mm-hmm. And I had friends that were from digitalmedia.com marketing. And they're like, well, it's not too late. You can still come out, you can still put the parent company under the name and people don't know. And I'm like, first off, at this point, because I do have such a level of respect for the plant, I wouldn't work for anyone who holds that against me. Let's just look at it from a business perspective. The fastest growing industry in the world and the greatest opportunity. So if that's a business person that goes, no, you worked in weed, I don't support that, I won't work for him. But second, what you touched on, the kids, the children, it's interesting because we actually were awarded, we did a great story on all these families that were moving their children up that were dealing with grand mal seizures. And this is back in like the early, like the Stanley Brothers, Charlotte's Web kind of era, right? And we were covering this and it really hit home for me because I don't know, what I studied in school with juvenile law and everything and children's rights and all that. And to your point, these parents were being chastised, but they were moving from places like Texas and Mississippi and Alabama to bring their kids to a place because Western medicine failed them. Yeah. And the side effects of Western medicine was detrimental to every aspect of that individual's life.
Right.
And they came up and they're going from 95 seizures to 5 seizures a week.
How can you argue with that?
You can't argue. And so that's again, I told, we were talking earlier, that's when I came out of the proverbial green closet and I'm like, I don't care what people think. And quite honestly, I'm at an age, I really shouldn't give a shit anyway. Right. Because what I believe in is what matters. And I'm not saying I'm always right. And I'm not saying word is born. I'm not. But when you find out facts like that and you see how much it improves life, and then you find out that the biggest studies from both the scientific and medical standpoint are happening in Tel Aviv, Israel. And I tell people like, that is the epicenter of study on this plant. And they're like, mm-hmm. Israel, I thought they were conservative. I'm like, no, they're open-minded because they know not everything that can be a solution comes in a petri dish and is man-made. Like trust Mother Nature. She has a lot more answers for us than people realize. Yeah. So I feel the same way. And that's what encouraged me to just stay. And people are like, you still enjoy it? You still love it? I'm like, yeah, I'm going on a decade. I can't imagine doing anything else.
You've been to a lot of cannabis events.
I have.
How many events have you been to?
I just hit my 190th. This past month. And, granted, it's been over a decade, but a majority of those happen when first with Weed Maps and to now. So it really happened like in the last 6 years. Oh. The one thing that I found, and I actually wrote a series on it, you probably know for MG Magazine, I wrote a multi-part series on the history of cannabis by country. So I decided, and I know, again, I've been kind of pushing more on that than other people in the space because a lot of people, they kind of start local and go global. And I decided to take a different approach. I wanted to support it from a global level and bring it back home.
Right.
So I started looking into different countries and where they were, and my travels were taking me there. I mean, thanks to Weed Maps, I went on a tour and brought the product to Australia and then went over to Europe and then more recently Thailand, like we talked about, South America, Jamaica, all these places I've been to thanks to this plant. And it's interesting because I found that, there's universal languages. One of those things is food. All of us need food. We need substance. We need water. We need to survive. But music is very universal.
Yeah.
Words or not, lyrics or not, the beat is part of that heart. And it's kind of like that theme song to our life to function. Cannabis is another. It doesn't matter if I spoke the language or not. I was greeted by happy smiles in the plant. And so
these are all just vibrations.
They are vibrations, man. Everything in the earth is shifting and it's moving into a faster vibration, but everything has energy. Mm-hmm. And that's what it comes back to. But man, I'm so thankful. I mean, some of the ones that really stand out is like Nimbin, Mardi Gras down in Nimbin. I was there for the 25th anniversary. And if you remember, again, earlier for us, but we know this happened, after the Summer Love here, the hippies were kind of pushed out because the yuppies were coming in the 80s and hippies were into granola and patchouli oil and all that crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So they were pushed out to Scotts Valley, or the local stayed in Berkeley, but a lot went up to Mendocino and Humboldt and
right.
Up the coast. And it was the same thing in Australia. A lot of those hippies moved out of Sydney and Brisbane and moved down to the countryside on the border of New South Wales and Queensland. And they started having this protestival. And I went down there and it was so experiential. And it was so similar to here, man. I mean, like the hairstyles, the drum circles, the bong tossing competitions, like all this stuff. I'm like, it's like being back in Northern California, but with a different accent.
Wow.
But everything else was like the way they respected the plant, the good vibes, they support each other. That was pretty radical. Cannabis, like we talked about, I've been encouraging people for years. I've seen the most people from our side of the pond ever this last year.
Yeah.
Out in Cannabis is insane. Expo Weed, the circuit down in Latam, the Expo Weed Chile, specifically in Santiago, is phenomenal. You get some great guys that come over from Europe, but there's a whole culture down there. Mm-hmm. I don't know why people don't really pay attention to South America, but that's a whole other scene. And they have a few Landrace that come out of there as well. So there's some history. Africa, Durban and Johannesburg has a lot going on, but several countries have been producing for years over there. So they have a whole vibe, but I've been enjoying it, man. It's really, I tell people there are places that were never on my bucket list. Mm-hmm. In the articles, if you get a chance, man, Thailand, like, do you know that the U.S. Postal Service has been one of the biggest drug dealers in history, in my opinion, as far as trafficking. But when our troops would go on leave serving Vietnam, they'd go over to the shores of Thailand. And that's where they discovered Thai stick. And they're using the U.S. Postal Service to ship that back to their hippie friends back in the 60s here. And then the term bong, that's a Thai term for how they consume cannabis, is bong. And that was brought over. So I learned stuff like that in doing that series. And again, it brings a whole other level of respect of how this is very much a universal plant, but it's a universal culture too.
Right.
So I've been loving it, man. And you're the same. Like that's what I love about you and your good vibes. You're like, I'm just along for a phenomenal ride and thankful to be a part of it. And like both of us kind of have
blessed.
that same kind.
Extremely blessed.
Extremely blessed. It's a great energy. It's a great experience to have.
Yeah.
You know? So definitely good stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And, the different cultures all over. And then Amsterdam at one point was the epicenter to a degree.
Yeah. It's changed. It's changed. Half of the coffee shops have closed down. The mayor who came in office, she's a nice woman, but she's been in since 18 now. She's trying to push the red light district out to the edge of the city. She's trying to push the cannabis out to the edge of the city. They're trying to make it so you have to be a legal resident to go into the coffee shops because they are technically safe havens, right? It's illegal to produce and courier. It's not technically legal or gray area until it crosses a threshold of the coffee shop. So it's a system that did kind of get abused, but you and I both know this, the real epicenter of cannabis in Europe is Spain and really is Barcelona. You're talking about Spain. There's 600-700 social clubs.
It's still a little more conservative than it was 10 years ago. Because 10 years ago, you could go around smoking joints on the street and you can't really do that anymore.
No, you can't see it, can't smell it, can't hear it, can't feel it. Like it's that kind of space. And the Catalan government has been trying to move it forward. But I'll tell you, man, it's proof of concept because like being a member of like HQ, just as an example, or Dank of England down there, and it proves that people that choose to consume alcohol can cohabitate with people who choose to consume flower. Mm-hmm. And you can have an environment where you can get drinks, you can get food, you can watch footy on the TV, you can play snooker, whatever.
Right.
But everyone gets along and everyone's good vibes, Yeah. And so it's like, we're having this big debate about social clubs domestically. It's like, go to Spain.
Go experience it in Spain.
Yeah, go experience and see that you can bring all these people together, do it, and you can monetize it.
Even if you don't smoke, go experience it. I feel like
100%.
Yeah, it's eye-opening, and we're talking about places that serve alcohol, that have cannabis, a lot of hash and stuff too. And some of them have food or coffee or drinks.
Yep. And they're not trying to hustle you through. Like the coffee shops is come in, get your spliff and your espresso and be done in 10 minutes. That's not the mentality of the social club. It's more of a co-op environment where you come to hang with friends and you might be watching soccer for 3-4 hours. Yeah. And they're not trying to rush you out because you're invested in that environment. Totally. So yeah, it's definitely, like I said, it's been a great experience and something that, again, both of us, I think, have fully enjoyed and enthralled ourselves in, Absolutely. So. Cool. So what's your favorite strain? What, as far as genetics go, what do you, you said forbidden fruit a little bit. Yeah. But as far as like you say, I heard Landrace. Is there a particular Landrace that you prefer growing? Where does that link? Because Landrace encompasses quite a few different things. Yeah. Yeah. So I've been nowhere to your level, nowhere to someone like Judry's level, but I've been collecting through my travels. And so I'm very fortunate to have some pure Durban from South Africa, thanks to a good friend, to get some Thai from being
Let's talk about Durban real quick because it's been a hot topic. So I believe that the Durban in the United States is not the same Durban that we experienced that came from Africa. Correct. I believe it's a super silver haze cross that Greenhouse and Sensi had, and some other people. Yep. I think Simon from Sirius, they had a Durban poison, but I believe it was crossed with a haze. And so the haze is very dominant. It leans towards that. The real true Durban is definitely more musky, in my opinion.
It is.
It's some sandalwood, musk, cherry.
Very
you
musky.
get the anise, that licoricey kind of muskiness.
Yeah. It's a really earthy cultivar. And I didn't pop the seeds that I got from over there, but I gave them to a good friend, Johnny Ray from Ray's. He's about an hour east of Garberville, phenomenal closed loop, has sheep on the hill, worm carcass, everything's all. I'm huge. He's a hip neck through and through, one of the smartest guys I've ever met. And I gave my seeds to him, not all of them, but gave a good amount of seeds to him. He full term outdoor, right? You know, he's got nature to work with. He sent me a picture and he showed me their trees. And again, this is another thing, you know, when it's more pure, not cross, because you're right. A lot of the Landrace came through Europe. Mm-hmm. And so when you get a Landrace from South Africa that's traveling through Europe, or you get something from Asia, or you get something from the Middle East that's traveling through Europe, to your point, they try to hardy it, they try to morph it, and it's not the same. Because the true Durban poison, no, it doesn't, you know, by bud strike, really quick tangent. So Northern Nights, which I was just doing, they had their 10-year anniversary. And so they wanted to do a cultivar with Northern Lights, which, to answer your question, that is one of my favorite, is Northern Lights. I like, because I grew up with it. And he sends me video. He had 3 different farms, including his own grow. And he sent me a video of it. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. The bud structure. That's how I didn't have to smell it. I didn't have to taste it. I saw the bud structure. I'm like, that's it. So that is a Northern Lights Dom. It's crossed with a GMO.
Specific look.
But it has a very specific look. And especially when you know how it's grown. And that's, again, I think why I lean towards outdoor, because the manipulation that occurs indoor, the bud structure doesn't always express correctly, in my opinion, when I let it go outdoors. So going back to John, he showed me a picture. He already grows trees, but he had a 12-foot ladder standing next to this thing, and it was 14 foot tall. And I'll show you the picture. It was incredible. And that's how I knew that it wasn't something crossed with a dwarf or a roulage or something else, because that's too many people cross based on what's convenient. Right. Oh, this is something that won't, contaminate the rest of my crop. This is something that won't get me in trouble. It'll stay stunted or dwarfed. Like a Sueño. That's another. I'm a huge fan of Sueño. Nobody knows that. It's a 50-50 pretty much of Sour D and Blue Dream, two that we were growing along with AK-47 when we were still pushing packs back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Nobody likes to grow because it's a squatty, not easy to grow, high maintenance plant, but the experiential is phenomenal. Mm-hmm. So going back to, I do genuinely like the Landrace. They are sincerely hard to find. I did find a guy over in Europe that supposedly has a true Northern Lights. In the meantime, I'm okay with, I'm going to get some seeds because I think Andrew actually, if I understand, he got those from Nat up at HSC. So, and it's a Northern Lights crossed with GMO, crossed with something else, but that does entice me.
If you're looking for a cut of some real Northern Lights, I got your back.
Oh my gosh, if you do it, because seriously, I've been looking, and the only place everyone keeps directing me back to, he's a nice guy. I just haven't had the chance to meet them in person. That'd be phenomenal.
So my buddy Gordon has done a lot of work. He's from Grass Valley, but he's done a lot of work with Northern Lights and Sour Diesel, and he's
nice.
He's got a huge collection of stuff, and it's definitely accessible.
I'd love that, because that is the one. There's just something, again, for me, because we know it's subjective, our endocannabinoid systems. Yeah. That's just always been the one.
It's so subjective. What works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for the next. Some person might like this profile. It's just like food and
it is
and everything else.
It is, yeah. Why do you like purple grapes and I like green grapes? You like the sweetness, I like the sour, whatever it is.
And they got some crazy grapes coming out too.
They do. Those cotton candy grapes are pretty dope. But
witch's fingers or whatever they are.
They're insane. And it's as long as it's natural, I'm all for it. I'm not about the
and I mean a lot of that stuff we'd heard GMO, but like the truth is, like a lot of that stuff is actually just data-driven breeding and actually experimentation, and so but done on a different level than I think a lot of people are doing with cannabis. Yeah, but that's changing. That's slowly changing. I mean, data-driven breeding is definitely changing. I think a lot of guys that I know that are doing breeding at scale are actually using data. It's like
you kind of need to now.
If you're doing autoflower breeding, you should be using data as well. Yeah, but.
Which we know how huge that is, because we've got a lot of similar friends across the pond. And, of course, they use, because of the growing environment where it is, dense population, that they're all about the autos. But it seems like, to your point, a lot of them are going more towards science and versus the traditional.
Well, you have to a degree. I mean, you can do whatever, if you're doing small tents, that's one thing. But if you're planting an acre or 2 acres or 20 acres, You want something that's consistent and you want to improve that over generations. If you're making seeds, you might as well be making better seeds.
Yeah.
Instead of just making seeds to make seeds. I feel like you're either going one way or another. You're not going right in the middle every time, unless it's stable, which it's not.
No. So, and that's, you see it with regs, the inconsistent, going back to when you're running just plain old seeds, it's a crapshoot.
Yeah.
I never know what I'm going to get, good, bad, or ugly,
Totally.
So,
well, and then the thing is growing it out multiple times. It's like if you just grow from seed outdoors, the next year you grow that same cut, it's probably going to be different.
Yeah. Yep.
So besides the environmental stuff, it's genetically, driven, it's genetically more mature.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, very true.
There's just sexual maturity that goes on where if you grow it multiple times, usually the third time, the fourth time, sometimes you hit it right the first time. But it's the third generation, I feel like is more of a true expression of where you're going to get down the road.
What you want. Yeah. Yeah. Cause I've done those. What I ran last year was F1 and it was little basket case. I mean, I was surprised, like in veg, it was some of the fastest leaves I ever saw, and not to stereotype, but to a certain extent you do pay attention to those things. And I'm like, wow, this is way leaning towards an indica.
Yeah, and I mean, even just clonal generations. So to taking a clone, as opposed to growing from seed, getting that clonal generation, a couple of those in, so you really know, because the genetics stabilize and then you get the same expression.
Yeah.
And then you put in tissue culture.
And that's a whole. What's your opinion on? I'm just kind of curious on how long to keep moms around, because I have some friends of like 9-10 rounds, and I'm like, doesn't it get to a point to where?
Well, so there's a lot of debate on the subject, and I feel like if your moms are healthy, you can keep using them, but from tissue culture, we do two rounds of clones and then put new moms in. Gotcha. Right, because we're worried about viral load. We're worried about just renewing the clones to keep them at the most optimal point. Makes sense. So we're doing Gen 1 from tissue culture. So we have the Gen 0s, which are the tissue culture plants, and then we take the clones off of those. Those are the Gen 1s, and we like those the best.
Nice.
So I feel like they're the most consistent. They respond the most consistently. Not that there's anything wrong with Gen 0s. They're a little bit harder to work with.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things, but 2 rounds. But I've seen people put their, I was talking about DJ Short a while back, but putting them in the ground every year, you let them veg out, and then, the vibrations of the earth restore the genetics. But there is truth to that. You get really rapid growth outdoors. So you're going to get really clean cuts. So if you don't have tissue culture, that's an option.
Yeah.
So that's the next best thing,
Nice. Cool, man.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, man. So I guess we need to smoke. We didn't smoke it. We're going to smoke something light. We're going to smoke some contest entry here.
Oh, no way.
It's from the Loops.
Love the contest too. I was following that. That's great. And you actually won the entrance. I think you're 4th place. It's like, we actually submitted ours in TerpLoc. I was like, that's super dope.
Yeah, they did. Totally. It was great seeing TerpLoc in there. And, we're doing it from clone next time. We're going to do tissue culture clone for the next contest. I feel like it'll even the playing field out a little bit more when you give genetics, especially stuff that's not super stable. You get stuff all across the board.
Yeah. Kind of take it more to that Formula 1 type where it's a little more uniform. Definitely makes sense. So to your point, level playing field, how it's expressed. This is
that is the way to smoke.
Extremely fat.
So I think a lot of people say that, like, I guess that's how I smoke mostly, because I feel like above 2 grams, you really start getting the flavor. I like the way they hit. I like the way they refire. Nice candy terps in there.
It's smooth too.
Yeah. So we've smoked almost all of the entries.
No way.
All gone. Yeah. I mean,
I almost felt, how long was from start? I'm not trying to be the interviewer.
Yeah, that's okay.
But I'm kind of curious, man, because I was following as much as I could during my travels, but
2-week period. It wasn't.
It felt
really
like it went by so quick.
Yeah, it really wasn't long enough. It was 15 days, right?
Okay.
So 15 days, and you're smoking every day in that 15-day period. You're eliminating stuff right off the bat. Like there's stuff that just got eliminated. I got it down to 10, and then those I would smoke 1 and then wait 2 hours because I want to feel the effect.
Yeah.
It was about the effect, but also about the flavor, right? And you don't want to kill your palate. And if you're smoking every day, you got to drink a ton of water, and then what you're doing is you're comparing one to the next, one to the next. And at the end, sometimes I'd fire both of them up back and forth and go, okay, well, I like the way this tastes, or I like the way this doesn't burn. And I'm using rice paper. So I do a reverse roll with rice paper.
Yeah.
I feel like that gives you
a little more neutral.
This is actually raw paper. I like raw papers too, but as far as like for the no burn, I like the rice.
Nice.
So yeah, it's also subjective too, it
is. It is. But I think there's some things like, to your point, if you did early elimination, I'm willing to guess that those are ones that were kind of obvious in nothing. I'm sure everyone great on efforts, but they probably failed somewhere along post-harvest, right? So something just wasn't properly cured.
I think the contest was rushed. To be 100% honest, we gave people seeds in December, expected them to have flower from seed in June. And if you waited a little bit too long to pop those seeds, you're having to harvest early.
Yeah.
And that was the main culprit, I think, for the problem is people had to harvest a little early. Even though some of the stuff that we've tested, we've popped some of the seeds since. We have some that finishes super early. But not everything's like that. And then, with growing conditions and environments, you just never know. Like even people growing in closets, if it's extra cold, it's going to take a little bit longer, if you don't have your environmentals dialed in. But yeah, so we're going to be doing another contest here in a couple months. Should be super exciting.
We'd love to sponsor you. I mean, I was stoked when you hit me up. I mean, I know you're a fan, like you said. I did the same thing too. I did the Pepsi challenge before I came on and obviously drank the Kool-Aid through and through and been nothing but stoked with the product. But when you reached out and said, hey, this is why I'm doing this, what I want to do, that's what we want to support. That's something that I've made very clear. I love my CEO. He gives me the freedom that I desire to make it be successful. But I was very clear and adamant about how I'm community first. You know, I mean, this is, and again, you don't have to be from NorCal. You don't have to be brought up by hippies to be culturally inclined or to respect the craft. But when it is kind of instilled in you, it's easier for you to know what the right decisions are in life. And I'm so fortunate that, again, he allows that, but that's what we're trying to do more of, is supporting the community because they need it more so than ever. I mean, it was like you talked about. So you went to the head, I went up to the hill, and I thought I'd see more growers, and these guys aren't coming out, and it's tough times right now. The industry's going micro macro. And I talked to you earlier about how you can easily compare the Canadian market to the California market because both of them came out guns a-blazing, didn't necessarily do things right. You had the wrong guys that were pushing all the weight. Now the craft guys, the culture guys are the ones that are coming up because they can stand through storms, whereas others can't. And especially when the money pulls out and all the rest.
Everything eventually comes full circle.
Kind of does.
Yeah, you look at California, Canada, it's like LPs, and then even LPs coming into California, though. There was a lot of LPs in California in the beginning.
Yeah, there was a move, especially during COVID, man. There was a lot of the Canadian money was coming in. I mean, even like Wana, I would have never thought love, obviously with Nancy and the team at Joe, Hodis, I go way back over there in marketing. But I was kind of surprised, like some of these companies. And the
quality was so rough.
Yeah.
And then compared to places like Colorado and Washington that legalized first, their market stabilized. I mean, they've done a whole nother round of consolidation though over the last year.
It's true.
They've struggled. During COVID, everybody had a good COVID. And so the ones that overexpanded really had a rough time during the consolidation. The ones that are still around are, it's improved.
Yep. Yeah. And it is, you're right. It's very, and as long as it isn't federal, we're going to talk it at this level, but I did just do a show recently in Oklahoma and it was not good. Like they're going through a hard reset, but then you don't want to be critical, but I'm still baffled, man, being in Colorado. And it's weird. Everyone's like, you got the business in Colorado and you're from California, but it was a good experience to cut my teeth in a market like that because I brought the experience, but also saw how it was for a market that wasn't familiar with legalization, because we legalized a lot of people. I mean, we legalized Prop P, which San Francisco is a city and county, but Prop P was legalized in 1990. So people think 96 for medical. We technically have known medical since the beginning, since we were in high school. Let's put it that way. And so going to a market like Colorado, and to your point, like I felt like they did it pretty well. They had to rework it and all the rest of it. But then Washington, we'll kind of do it our way. We're a little different. I didn't agree with how they, you don't need medical anymore.
No,
so you got what you want.
I totally am against how they did it. And
the whole church and state.
One of my aunts, she is medical in Washington, and she was a medical grower growing for herself. And to tell her that she can't grow anymore, that she has to go buy it from somebody. She's been pushing organics since the 90s. She's one of the longest living survivors of AIDS and HIV.
Wow.
And
they just did the walk here in San Francisco over the weekend.
It's pretty wild, and she's been a cannabis consumer for a long time, but to tell her that she can no longer grow legally, which I guess they allow a small amount of plants, but it's like,
They technically know. I mean, I tell people, I'm like, Washington is one of those states where it's not legal. People are like, really? And I'm like, yeah, like not everyone's doing it absolutely right. Say with Oregon, limitless license. And then all of a sudden, guys, I'm growing hemp and pushing all that stuff to the other coast.
Oh, that was a whole crazy mess.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And then Oklahoma did the same. I'm like, does nobody learn anything from anyone? It was a money grab.
The government's like, let's just give everyone license so we get as much money as possible and as quickly as possible.
That's what I tell people. It's short-term gain or long-term goal. And that was very selfish of the government to say, hey, we're going to play the extreme capitalism card. We'll get rich along the way. But what happened? Stuff going out the back door.
Let's get rich quick instead of like look at the long term.
And invest in it. Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of people are short-sighted. And it happens in every aspect of life.
True.
People, they look at the immediate and they're like, ooh, look how much we can get for these licenses. Let's just get all that money and then we'll worry about it down the road. We can adjust the laws or we can do this. Unfortunately, you're getting some of those people that are producing amazing flower, like in California, that there's this barrier for entry to get in the legal, in the legal zone. Unfortunately,
a friend paid $250,000 for his just to get legal from the shadows. Phenomenal grower, phenomenal product, and he's like, Lance, it cost me $250,000. And everyone thinks they have that buried in their backyard. By the way, everyone thinks that all the guys on the hill are still sitting on $1 million in shoe boxes.
No, but there's a ton of guys that it was the barrier for entry, and you either had shitty quality and you couldn't get in, or you had great quality but you didn't have the money or the resources.
Very true.
So, but
those guys are there's some like.
I still have friends too that grow amazing flower that they don't even give a fuck. They do other things, what I mean? So it's like the hobbyist grower, and some of those guys grow the best flower too.
And they're making it work. They're smart. And then you have the ones who did come out and now they're worried to go back into the shadows. So a few of those guys, they're doing organic produce and going back to farmers markets or GCs. Like I know a couple guys and now I'm like, you're a general contractor, dude. Like, you know more about growing than I know about everything in the world. Yeah. Like you are a master, but they have to be realistic and go, hey, it's just not,
Totally.
So, but every market but I was saddened for Oklahoma because it's really hurting, it's really hurting out there. But
well, the beauty of it is they can change. We can change. We can all change. We can all make a difference. We can recognize the problems and then have solutions to correct those problems.
Yeah. Learn from the wrongs.
Hopefully. Where do you see the industry going in the next 5 years? It's, oh my gosh, we have to stabilize a little more. I would assume
we definitely do. I've been concerned. I thought it was going to happen at the end of Trump's term. And some say that there's a possibility during Biden's term. But I still feel like federal legalization is going to be a political pawn. I think it's going to be one of those. I mean, when you have 85%,
silly.
And this is
silly.
This is Pew data, you guys. This is not Headset, BDS, New Frontier. This isn't a niche or industry specific analytics or data company. Pew did a study. 85% of the populace of this country are okay or pro cannabis at some either medical, adult use, or both. So the fact that the old blue hairs on the hill, are still trying to play this political angle. And it's another article I wrote. Like a lot of people like, oh, but the big three. And for those that don't know, we're not talking Ford, Chrysler, Chevy. We're talking about pharmaceutical, alcohol, and tobacco. So I wrote an article. I'm like, you guys, all those dudes have been in this industry for years. Yeah. Pharma's been in it. I mean, this is where the government contradicts itself, right? So it's a Schedule 1, which didn't even make sense to me when I studied it in school. I'm like, you remember Sesame Street when we were kids? Both grew up on it. Totally. 3 of these kids are doing their own, doing the same thing. One of these kids are doing their own. Mm-hmm. When I saw all the Schedule 1 drugs and then saw weed there, I was like, there's got to be some sort of story. And that's when I started learning more about the historical prohibition and weaponizing it towards minorities.
Totally.
But man, it is crazy because this whole federal thing, it's overwhelming as far as how much support, but those big guys are already here. I mean, so GW Pharmaceuticals, which got acquired by Jazz. So GW Pharmaceuticals, one of the biggest pharmaceuticals in the world, based out of the UK. During COVID, and I'm not conspiracy theorist, just it's interesting that Jazz acquired GW Pharmaceutical, which was the biggest pharma out of Ireland. Now they're actually pushing their organic, plant-based cannabinoid pharmaceuticals in Asia. But they're the ones who technically have the only one registered here in the States. So out of 5 that use synthetic cannabinoids, they have the FDA approval on a drug that uses organic or plant-based pharmaceutical. Right. So where things are going to go, pharma's already here. Alcohol's already been invested for years. Tobacco's already been invested. I mean, big time invested for years, both domestic and in Europe. Don't forget. Mm-hmm. I mean, this isn't just a domestic thing. Right. I do think that federal will come around. I hope it is sooner than later because just like our education system, we're falling behind.
Yeah.
Like we're really falling behind.
Luxembourg just legalized. I don't know if you saw that this morning, right? Luxembourg
legalized. Malta, people might not hold relevance, a few 100,000 populous island off the coast of Italy, but Malta legalized. And they're starting out private before commercial, which I have a level of respect for. Like people are critical of DC, but I give DC credit for that. Like it should be, hey, I grow great weed and you're a medical patient, let me help you, versus bringing in the suits. So it's roots over suits. And so Malta took that approach. To your point, Luxembourg now is really rooting for Czechia because they decriminalized the drug back in the 70s, but they are actually waiting for Germany now, which is frustrating because
the whole
Czech
EU
Republic
is kind of waiting for Germany to see what happens, because Germany is really going to set the pace for everybody else.
They are. And ever since Brexit, Germany, highest GDP, highest population, not huge, 80 million. They're not, I mean, we're 43, 45, whatever here in this state alone. But ever since post-Brexit, Germany really has. And Germany did take the torch. They had a great prime minister during COVID. And she really did say, hey, like EU, we can get through this. So I respect how Germany is like that. But Germany also overthinks things. They overregulate things and they over-engineer things.
Right.
So that's a concern
that's
that Germany is taking the torch.
Dogs and cars. With dogs and cars, that's great.
Yeah.
Overthinking, over-engineering.
Exactly.
You look at the German automobiles, they're fantastic.
Yep.
Not saying anything. I have a Chevy too. So...
But they over-engineer stuff.
I have German and Chevy. But I'm all, but I definitely think that Germany's setting the pace. And once Germany goes legal, it's going to be a lot easier for the other countries to follow suit in Europe.
Yes.
So,
yeah, it'll definitely happen. And everyone's poaching, itching at the bit. As over in England, I think I saw more South Africans at one show than I ever have. Because a lot of the South Africans were actually, they want to be the ones who, because it's a great growing climate. I mean, so is Portugal, so is Spain.
Totally.
But you look at the latitude and the South Africans have a lot of potential and they're itching at the bit to feed the European market.
Absolutely.
So is Colombia, and so is Israel, and so is Canada. And so,
in places like Germany, I think they have a cap of 20,000 pounds a year, which is nothing, right?
No.
Like there's companies in California that produce that per month.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
It's insane. It's insane when you look at it. And in the amount of consumption, everyone can have their opinion on percentage, but I'd venture to say a fifth of the populace in most countries, including over in Europe, are consumers.
Yeah.
So the demand is there. And how they're getting it.
And the demand grows too. So it grows exponentially, with legalization. There's people, Colorado, it was big. They were big into edibles too.
Oh my gosh.
They really kind of did that. There was an insane scene. The edible scene, and you go into shops and they got every type of edible you could possibly imagine. Stuff that I never even thought of, they'd have there and be like, whoa. And
like
I used to be
candy with tea.
Totally.
Some of it. Yeah, that's another topic. You're right. I mean, I was there for that. There's Incredibles and Wana and I mean, even like one of my favorites was Sweetgrass Kitchen because everyone was doing short path. They're doing CO2 or BHO, and Julie went against the grain and she went canna butter. She did old school, so she wasn't doing the oil. She was doing the canna butter. She ran Sueño. She actually ran Sueño, and I was so impressed because I'm like, it's not the easiest, it's not the quickest, but man, when it comes to if you want to clean your house or if you want to lay on the couch,
when edibles that too, like you can go through different cultivars that lean heavy towards, the indica cerebral, get you very down and out, and then you can go on that equatorial kind of where it like wakes you out. Tropical equatorial varieties that lean that way with edibles, especially if you do like a full spectrum edible. Those things can either kick your ass or do whatever. They have all kinds of different effects. Most people think edible. Yeah. Yeah. But really then you have to do something like canna butter or, you start using distillate, you're not going to get those experiences.
No, it's different. It's just like the race to legalization, right? Sometimes and most of the time, the fastest isn't always the easiest. Right. And so that's why it's a pain in the butt for me to make canna butter versus oil. And I've been lazy. I've done olive oil based. But I love the canna butter because I know I'm going to capture as many of those terpenes, not just cannabinoids, that I can.
Right.
And lipidoid, we love more so when it comes to the two, uptake is so much better with butter and fatty than it is with oil.
Right.
Because it's oil and water versus fat, right? So you start geeking out and going down these paths, and it's so fun. And that's why it's a constant education.
Right.
And
they're making water-soluble THC now where you can mix it in water.
Yeah, remember nanotechnology was a total buzzword, but to your point, 45 minutes to an hour, no more. I have stuff that I consume. It's a 15-minute onset.
Yeah. And it goes away pretty fast too.
Yeah. It does without the headache because they're actually, producing it correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a whole airspace. Love the edibles.
Well, yeah. So let's do another podcast one of these days and we'll talk about the bags and maybe do something for the contest. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Maybe send all the people that put in entries bags so they can return their samples.
I'd love to do them. And like I said, love what you guys are doing. Totally support it. These are definitely just, I think, one of many opportunities, but
these are great. These are really, really nice, by the way.
Thanks, man.
I love the skin too. The skin on these, it's got that apple box skin, Yep.
Did the soft touch, got the little Easter eggs in the gusset too. So this is actually really quick. We kind of went with the sublimation down there, but this is a 7 gram. So obviously if you're pushing indoor, you can probably squeeze 10, if you're outdoor and larvae, 5 to 7. Yeah. But this has the Terplock technology.
I think we're going to do a seed release with these. We'll do a special seed release. I think we're doing some distribution stuff. So it'd be kind of fun working with some of these distributors and using this for seeds. I think
100%.
I think it'd be really cool.
And again, upcycle it, man. Take out the seeds and use it as your stash bag when you're done growing.
So if I have one for Skittles, I'll put Skittles in there. If I have one for GMO, I'll put GMO in there the next time. So I kind of try to keep it consistent,
keep it pure.
With the genetics. 'Cause I really like storing everything in them. The infinity jars like these, they're all right too. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with the infinity jars, but I definitely prefer, as far as for long-term storage, the Terplock. So, man, thank you very much.
You got it for sure. Thanks for having me, man.
Where can people find you if they're looking for Terplock or if they're looking for Lance?
Yeah, great question. So growbags.com or obviously grow bag handles across all social media. For myself, I'm 805 Lance. And so I'm pretty active. Most people know I'm really active on LinkedIn, pretty active on Instagram. Always telling my story again. I'm advocate, not activist. So I lead with education, not a closed fist. But definitely follow me, engage with me. I love helping and mentoring people. There's a lot of people I brought into the community, they're like, well, I'm a consumer. I love growing, and I'm like, hey, if you're passionate, that's all it takes. And you got a skill. So feel free to reach out.
Half of it's passion and drive.
It is
passionate and driven.
Yep. Gotta have that work ethic, man. This is not for the weak. I mean, if people think they're just getting in for fun and giggles and free weed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's you.
You want to be a rock star?
Exactly true.
Yeah.
So thanks. Great. Yeah, man, this was great.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Thank you again.